What a pleasure to have you all here. Thank you for coming. I was going to say during the rain, and fortunately it didn't even rain. I can't think of a better place to return to fiction after more than 2 decades than here at the Center for Fiction, which didn't even exist the last time I published a novel. It's the most appropriate place. And before I read a bit, I want to answer the question, why did it take me over 2 decades to get back to fiction when I actually do think of myself primarily as a novelist? Somebody asks me what I do, that's what I say, but it's been a while. Well, it wasn't because I wanted to stray from fiction, it's because life has a way of interfering and sending you on detours. I had finished my 4th novel and was getting ready to write my 5th on an island off the coast of Maine where I used to spend my long summers in isolation without any telephone, or there were no cell towers in that area, in that remote area, and no electricity and no plumbing, no toilets, no road, nothing, and people were really curious when they heard how I lived. So I thought, okay, it's time now to write about this experience because people really seemed interested. And I thought I was going to write them a novel set there. But the fact is, it's very hard to write a novel with only 1 character, no dialogue. So I didn't exactly know what I was doing, and at first it really threw me, and then I thought, forget it, just write it. So I did. I wrote it, I sent it to my agent. It was called Drinking the Rain, and I said to her, well, what is this? And she said, well, obviously it's a memoir. So, thank you. So that was how I happened to write my first memoir. But when that was over, I was going back to fiction, so I did. I thought I was starting, was it this? Yes, I think it was this very book, Menage. I was going to start it, and then life hit me again. My parents, who were very old, became infirm, and they couldn't take care of themselves anymore, and so it fell to me to take care of them, as it does to all of us eventually, if we're lucky enough to have our parents, to have them get into old age. And since most of my friends are at least 10 years younger than I am, I always reach the stage in the life course a decade before they do. And so I thought it would be probably very useful for me to write a memoir about what it's like to see your parents out of the world and so on. So I did. I took a detour from fiction and I wrote A Good Enough Daughter, which was my 2nd memoir. And then back to fiction, right? So by now I have, like, I don't know, a bit of a first draft of, almost a first draft of what we're celebrating today, Menage, which is a satirical comic novel. And I was getting ready to spend the summer revising it and working on it when fate did it again. My husband fell, had a terrible accident, suffered an awful traumatic brain injury, and I didn't work on a satirical novel that summer. In fact, I didn't do any writing for more than a year because I was trying to get him back to health. But after a year or so, it became clear that he wasn't going to recover, and I had to arrange our lives so that, to accommodate our new circumstances, which meant making as good an accommodation as possible. And for me, that meant being able to write again. So I hired somebody, one of the people is right here in the front row, to stay with Scott for a few, 5 or, and later, around 5 hours a day while I wrote. But I couldn't write comedy. there was nothing more intense than the experience we had just been through, and so I wrote my third memoir, which was about my husband's accident, our life together, and our making a really good accommodation to our new circumstances, and that was called To Love What Is. Well, when that was published, it was time to return to fiction again. But I was getting a little worried about whatever these forces are that keep delivering various whammies and double whammies. But I thought, yes, I'm going to finish this book before the next thing happens. And I did. So there's one other thing that I want to mention before I read. This book is as I say, it's a satirical novel about 3 characters. It's a satire on the 1%, the rich, and also on the literary establishment and the ridiculousness of literary celebrity. So 2 of the characters are a couple, the McKays. Mac is a rising real estate developer, very successful. His wife, Heather, is staying home, raising her children, but she has literary ambitions. He has built a beautiful house for them in the suburbs, and she's left her New York life, and she's there. So the third character in this book, third protagonist, who's really an antagonist, they all are, is the literary fellow. He's an emigre writer, once quite famous. His name is Zoltan Barbu, and when I do my reading, he should have an accent, but I don't read with an accent, so forgive me. You'll have to imagine his accent, which is part of his charm. Anyway, Mac invites him to come live with them in their suburban mansion because he is totally broke, he is being evicted, and he is really trying to write, and this will provide him a situation in which he can write nicely, freely. So I was going to tell you this one other thing. People have, in the question and answer Q&As I've been doing for various blogs and journals, people ask me, you're a feminist? What does this have to do with feminism? What is this? So the fact is, I never know whether any book I've written is feminist until my readers tell me. And this is no different. I don't know. But I do know that the question of what is feminist fiction is one that has interested me for a very long time. In addition to Ménage, I have another new book that just came out I think 3 weeks ago, which is my collected essays. First time I've ever done that. It's called A Marriage Agreement and Other Essays, 4 Decades of Feminist Writing. And in that book, there is one essay called The Taint, which is the taint of writing feminist fiction. In it, I examine a lot of different definitions. I ask all my friends, what is feminist fiction? And are you a feminist fiction writer? And at the end of that essay, there is one definition by a scientist who is also a feminist, Naomi Weinstein, and this is what she says. She says, feminist fiction is fiction that does not admire patriarchy or accept its ideology, nor does it portray its male characters as naturally more exciting, more important, or more valuable than its female characters. In addition, the female characters, whether they be villains or heroes, are neither necessarily nice nor necessarily beautiful. In this way, feminist fiction challenges the patriarchal belief in the fixed and eternal nature of men and women. Now, I don't know whether Ménage is a piece of feminist fiction or not, but I do know that it does not admire the patriarchy or accept its ideology. In fact, the whole book makes fun of those. That may be the main thing it does. Okay. So since this is a book party, I'm going to read a very edited, shortened version of the section in the book, which is a book party. The elevator opened directly. Did this go out again?
It went out and back on.
Oh, it's back on?
Yeah.
Okay. The elevator opened directly into the small entrance area of a huge, high-ceilinged loft. A plump woman held out both dimpled hands to the McKays and both rouged cheeks to Zoltan, then pulled them all into the main room. She smelled of jasmine, and throughout Zoltan's introductions of the McKays to their hostess, she flashed perfect white teeth. "So you're the lucky people Zoltan has settled in with," said Rebecca Schaefer, flushed with the reflected glow of purple silk and polished hardwood floors. "I'm so glad to meet you, finally. Put your coats back there. Zoltan can introduce you around." Rebecca's age was indecipherable to Heather, but she guessed she was probably in her mid-40s. She had the unlined, luminous skin that often serves as consolation to the fat. Her delicate mouth and nose were diminutive and shapely amid the rounded cheeks and chins. Nevertheless, Heather was astonished that a woman of such girth, despite the power that came from writing reviews for the Times and the New Republic, had attracted literary lovers of the stature of Zoltan. Fluted cast iron columns, painted mauve, held up a stamped tin ceiling crossed with sprinklers and pipes. Not even the crush of cruising bodies obscured the spectacular wall of windows facing south toward all the lit up towers of Lower Manhattan and the harbor. To Heather, this loft defined a life, one she had let slip away with hardly a fight, like so many others. The small studio with fireplace and Murphy bed and dainty furniture somewhere in the village where she would live alone. The rollicking punk pad, her hair spiked and wild. A summer cottage by a lake, half of it a kitchen with fishing for the children. This loft. On their way to the bar, she whispered to Matt, "Wouldn't you love to live here?" He stopped. "Are you kidding? Trade what we've got for bare pipes and sprinklers, plus nowhere for the kids to play, city noise and fumes? You'd hate it here. Believe me, you've got such romantic ideas, Heather." Other people, she brooded, did it and loved it, and went off to the mountains or the beach in the summer. But she supposed Mac was right. Real estate was what he knew best. Still, if Mac died, she would sell the house. She would sell the house and live off the proceeds, buy herself a loft, eat brunches at Balthazar, shop at the farmer's market in Union Square, she'd cruise the Chelsea galleries. Besides, continued Mac, this would cost us twice as much for a fraction of the space we've got now. Real estate markets all over the country are tanking, but Manhattan prices stay astronomical. And what have you got when you're through? Essentially one big room. For singles, maybe. For a family, forget it. Okay, said Heather. She spotted Zoltan near the bar talking to two attractive people. A man whose bald head, or was it shaved, was firmly set atop a youthful body sheathed in jeans and a dark, well-tailored jacket. The other, a young, pretty, moon-faced woman painted with a slightly garish shade of blush and style of eye treatment. Zoltan waved the McKays over. He'd been told to take care of them, introduce them around. "Come, Heather, Mac, I want you to meet Wayne Auerbach and..." "Erica Esposito," said Wayne. "Zoltan Barbu." "Oh," said Erica, catching her breath. "I've heard of you." "These are the McKays, Heather and Mac," continued Zoltan, "my benefactors." Barely glancing at the McKays, Erica focused her blue gaze on Zoltan. In an excited voice, she exclaimed, "You're famous, aren't you?" Wayne coughed. Zoltan puckered his lips into the smirk he wore to denote modesty. What was he to say? Thank you very much? No, I'm not famous. It means nothing. You may be too someday. And proceeded with the introductions. Wayne here, famous New York editor. Mac, famous builder. You should see the Eden we live in that he built. Really, said Erica. Where? In Wild Bloom, New Jersey. New Jersey, she said, shocked. There, my dear, said Wayne, patting Erica's hand. Contrary to recent reports, there is still life beyond Manhattan and Brooklyn. We are exactly 70 minutes from Lincoln Center, defended Heather. And we have a forest in front yard, added Zoltan, and books, walls and walls of books. Heather has amazing library. Heather beamed for her books. Really, said Wayne. In that case, as soon as you get home, you should look up Chekhov's The Seagull. Or perhaps you remember, Act 2 opens with Irina and the doctor reading Maupassant. Now pay attention to this, Erica. Quote, it says, inadvisable for people in society to fawn over writers and invite them into their hauses, as for a corn chandler to raise rats in his granary. End quote. And who should know better than Maupassant or Chekhov? Consider yourself warned, Erica. Chagrined by Wayne's patronizing remark, Erica turned to Heather for relief. Are you a writer too? She began. During the introductions, the women's occupations, unlike the men's, had not been specified. No. Well, yes, if journalism counts. And you? Do you write? I wish. I'm a reader, though, said Erica, bobbing her head as the three men drifted off with their drinks. I haven't read anything he's written, but now that I've met him, I'm going straight out and get his books. What's it like living with him? Does he show you what he's working on? Heather shook her head. If he was living with me, said Erica, I'd read his manuscripts when he went out. But you won't tell him I said so, will you? She giggled and crinkled her blue eyes. Near a corner table, Mac popped raw cashews one at a time into his open mouth and watched the guests circulate among the writers positioned like pillars around the room. He watched and popped until the bowl was empty. Here, let me fill that up, said Rebecca, the hostess, sidling up from behind, reaching for the empty bowl. Not for me, said Mac. I've had enough. Don't be silly, she said. There's no such thing as enough, and followed it with a brazen pause. To Mac, she suddenly began to seem less fat and more voluptuous. He would have to read her stuff. Rebecca said, I was thinking of giving a party in honor of Zoltan's return to New York, but since he's described your estate, some of us were hoping that maybe you'd want to have the party instead. Do you think I'm naughty to suggest it? Something in the way she said the word naughty gave Mac the distinct impression that she was suggesting more than he could make out. No harm in suggesting, he said. He thought he was saying it non-committally, but the particular laugh Rebecca tossed at him, her head cocked coquettishly, her lips parted to reveal the iridescent teeth, told him he might have conveyed something more. She took his arm. Come, we're both empty. Let's fill up together. Near the windows, Orville Lask, the guest of honor, clasped Zoltan's shoulder. They had first met at a writers' conference in Santa Fe and then wound up sharing an office for a semester at the New School. Orville was small and sickly, with a perpetual sniffle, a high voice, flat feet, and rimless glasses, whose career had been devoted to developing in print an image of himself as big and tough, as his enemies were quick to point out. He did not resemble the picture on his book jackets. Before he and Zoltan had become office mates, he had twice written pointed criticisms of Zoltan, once for his long silence and once for his sententious style. But today he could afford to be chummy, not only because he had excluded those particular essays from his new collection, but also because this was his book party. And unlike Zoltan and all the other writers present, who weren't publishing anything this season, he was relieved of writing worries while he was occupied promoting his new book, plus a few grace months more. "Rebecca tells me," said Orville to Zoltan, "you got yourself another setup. Rich patron, dream house in the country. Son of a bitch, you always did know how to pull off deals, didn't you?" "What do you mean?" asked Zoltan. "Don't be coy," said Orville. "You know what I mean. Hollywood contracts, free pad in the village, now this. Bet you're banging the wife, too." "Careful," said Zoltan. "She's standing over there." "And no." "Where?" "There, in the green dress," said Zoltan. "Damn," said Orville. "Is there some foundation to apply to?" Zoltan smiled. "When you get tired of country living, man, introduce me, okay?" A waiter carrying a platter of tiny tekamaki caught Zoltan's attention. He bowed slightly before following the waiter away. He snatched up a canapé and slipped it whole into his mouth. He was just settling in to savor it when a stranger pronounced his name. "Zoltan Barbu?" Annoyed to be interrupted, Zoltan examined the person's face. Stuck out ears, bulbous eyes, a high forehead that would have excited a phrenologist, a stringy neck circled by a bow tie. "Tony Agasian," said the man, extending his hand. "I thought that was you, Zoltan. We met years ago at a pen panel on Writers in Exile, remember? But what are you doing here? I thought you were in California writing for the movies." As Zoltan systematically searched his memory bank, Agasian sprang on him the forbidden question. "So what are you working on?" Zoltan was aghast at such a breach of etiquette. Writers had been known to choke on their food or spill their drinks in face of such a blatant demand to justify themselves. Those who could brag of a recent success or a book in press were exempt, but everyone else felt assaulted by the intrusive question. On the early advice of a friend, Zoltan had prepared a response to it, especially when sprung on him by a layman, which presumably described this meddling Mr. Agasian. Either that, or, if he too was a writer, he was perhaps a sufferer of Asperger's syndrome, a major symptom of which was a lack of empathy and social grace. Before Zoltan could deliver his rehearsed response, his interlocutor's cell phone began playing Beethoven, and he gestured to be excused. With relief, Zoltan moved quickly away. The decibel level of the room was high enough to give him a headache. Suddenly, he was stopped by the insistent ring of silver spoon on crystal goblet wielded by Rebecca, flanked by her tall, hunky neurosurgeon of a husband. People, I have an announcement," she said. Guests began exchanging signs. Zoltan swiveled in his tracks and urgently searched for Mac to signal his desire to leave the party. "I am so glad," said Rebecca, "that you could all join us tonight to tip a glass to our guest of honor, my dear friend Orville Lask, who has kindly agreed to grace us with a brief reading from his new book, published just last week." There was a sudden scurry of bodies as some claimed choice seats on one of the leather sofas or grabbed a chair, while others began inching toward the coat room. Rebecca continued, This book's praises have already begun, as you will see in next week's Times Book Review. Yes, isn't it wonderful? A page 7 review. And no, I did not write it. We are far too good friends. This is the Times, not N+1. Now, if you'd like to refresh your drinks before Orville begins, Mac, who had just emerged from the bathroom, caught Zoltan's signal and went immediately off to retrieve the coats, while Heather, flushed with happiness, picked up the signal from across the room and went to summon the elevator. In the few moments between Rebecca's finishing and Orville's beginning to speak, Zoltan commandeered his hostess's hand for a parting kiss, intended to convey their regrets at being unable to stay for the reading and discussion. Rebecca shook a remonstrative index finger at her naughty boy, but in the end relented, bestowing on him her signature, coy, sparkling, flirtatious smile. Zoltan hurried to the elevator. Rebecca, performing magical action at a distance, zinged her smile across the room to dazzle the departing trio before they were swallowed by the elevator doors. Then she swiveled to beam it on the waiting guest of honor. Thank you. There's just one other thing I want to say. I don't know if it's feminist fiction or not, but I do know that I have been a feminist activist for 40 years. That it's 40 years this month ago that Memoirs of an Ex-Convict was published. And I am really happy that the Occupy movement has started political activism in a big way again in this city and the country and maybe the world. And the women of Occupy Wall Street. Wow, W-O-W, women of Occupy. Women occupying Wall Street. Right, thank you, Judy. Are having their first feminist General Assembly the day after tomorrow on Thursday at Washington Square Park at 6:30. And for those of you who want to see a feminist resurgence, and particularly coming out of Occupy, do come. We're going to have fun, and I hope it'll be important and just be the beginning of a lot of feminist General Assemblies. And for those of you who haven't yet connected with Occupy, or haven't, I shouldn't say yet, I'm sorry, who haven't connected with Occupy, this would be a really friendly, wonderful place to connect. And there'll be a lot of people of my generation as well as the young. Okay.